Islam is the third largest faith in the United States after Christianity and Judaism. According to a 2010 study, it is followed by 0.9% of the population, compared to 70.6% who follow Christianity, 22.8% unaffiliated, 1.9% Judaism, 0.7% Buddhism, and 0.7% Hinduism. According to a new estimate in 2016, there are 3.3 million Muslims living in the United States, about 1% of the total U.S. population. American Muslims come from various backgrounds and, according to a 2009 Gallup poll, are one of the most racially diverse religious groups in the United States. Native-born American Muslims are mainly African Americans who make up about a quarter of the total Muslim population. Many of these have converted to Islam during the last 70 years. Conversion to Islam in large urban areas has also contributed to its growth over the years. While an estimated 10 to 30% of the slaves brought to colonial America from Africa arrived as Muslims, Islam was stringently suppressed on plantations. Prior to the late 19th century, most documented non-enslaved Muslims in North America were merchants, travelers, and sailors. For the 1880s to 1914, several thousand Muslims immigrated to the United States from the former territories of the Ottoman Empire and the former Mughal Empire. The Muslim population of the U.S. increased dramatically in the 20th century, with much of the growth driven by a comparatively high birth rate and immigrant communities of mainly Arab and South Asian descent. About 72% of American Muslims are immigrants or second generation. In 2005, more people from Islamic countries became legal permanent United States residents, nearly 96,000, than there had been in any other year in the previous 2 decades. In 2009, more than 115,000 Muslims became legal residents of the United States. History. Early records. One of the earliest accounts of Islam's presence in North America dates to 1528, when a Moroccan slave, called Estefanico by his Spanish masters, was shipwrecked near present-day Galveston, Texas. He and 4 survivors subsequently traveled through much of the American Southwest and the Mexican interior before reaching Mexico City. Muslims' presence is affirmed in documents dated more than a century before religious liberty became the law of the land, as in a Virginia statute of 1682 which referred to Negroes, Moors, mulattoes, and others born of an in heathenish, idolatrous, pagan, and Mahometan parentage and country, who heretofore and hereafter may be purchased, procured, or otherwise obtained as slaves. One of the first documented Muslims in North America was Anthony Janser Juan van Sully, a landholder and merchant of mixed Dutch-Moor descent who settled in New Netherlands in the 17th century. An early Egyptian immigrant is mentioned in the accounts of the Dutch settlers of the Catskill Mountains and recorded in the 1884 History of Greene County, New York. According to this tradition, an Egyptian named Norsredin settled in the Catskills in the vicinity of the Catskill Mountain House. He befriended the local indigenous American chief, Shandaken, and sought the hand of his daughter Lotuana in marriage. Rejected, he poisoned Lotuana and in consequence was caught and burned alive. American Revolution and thereafter. Records from the American Revolutionary War indicate that at least a few Muslims fought on the American side. Among the recorded names of American soldiers are Yusuf bin Ali and Bampet Muhammad. The first country to recognize the United States as an independent nation was the Sultanate of Morocco under its ruler Mohammed bin Abdullah. In the year 1777, He maintained several correspondences with President George Washington. On December 9, 1805, President Thomas Jefferson hosted an iftar dinner at the White House for his guest Sidi Solomon Melameli, an envoy from Tunis. Bilali Muhammad was a Fuller Muslim from Timbo, Fouta Jalan, in present-day Guinea-Conakry, who arrived at Sapelo Island during 1803. While enslaved, he became the religious leader and imam for a slave community numbering approximately 80 Muslim men residing on his plantation. During the War of 1812, Muhammad and the 80 Muslim men under his leadership protected the master's Sapelo Island property from a British attack. He is known to have fasted during the month of Ramadan, worn a pheasant kaftan, and observed the Muslim feasts, in addition to consistently performing the 5 obligatory prayers. In 1829, Bilali authored a 13-page Arabic risala on Islamic beliefs and the rules for ablution, morning prayer, and the calls to prayer. Known as the Bilali document, it is currently housed at the University of Georgia in Athens. Between 1785 and 1815, over 100 American sailors were held for ransom in Algiers. Several wrote captivity narratives of their experiences that gave most Americans the first view of the Middle Eastern Muslim ways, and newspapers often commented on them. The views were generally negative. Royal Tyler wrote The Algerian Captive, an early American novel depicting the life of an American doctor employed in the slave trade who, himself, is captured and enslaved by Barbary pirates. Finally, Presidents Jefferson and Madison sent the American Navy to confront the pirates, and ended the threat in 1815 during the First Barbary War. During negotiation of the Treaty of Peace which ended hostilities, American envoys made clear that the United States had no animosity towards any Muslim country. 19th century. On the morning of April 4, 1865, near the end of the American Civil War, Union troops commanded by Col. Thomas M. Johnston set ablaze the University of Alabama. A copy of the Quran known as the Quran, commonly called the Al-Quran of Muhammad, was saved by one of the university's staff. 292 Muslims are known to have fought during the Civil War. The highest-ranking Muslim officer during the war was Captain Moses Osman. Nicholas said, formerly enslaved to an Arab master, came to the United States in 1860 and found a teaching job in Detroit. In 1863, Said enlisted in the 55th Massachusetts Colored Regiment in the United States Army and rose to the rank of sergeant. He was later granted a transfer to a military hospital, where he gained some knowledge of medicine. His Army records state that he died in Brownsville, Tennessee, in 1882. Another Muslim soldier from the Civil War was Max Hassan, an African who worked for the military as a porter. A Muslim named Haj Ali was hired by the United States Cavalry in 1856 to tend camels in Arizona and California. He would later become a prospector in Arizona. Haj Ali died in 1903. During the American Civil War, the scorched earth policy of the North destroyed churches, farms, schools, libraries, colleges, and a great deal of other property. The libraries at the University of Alabama managed to save one book from the debris of the library buildings. On the morning of April 4, 1865, when federal troops reached the campus with an order to destroy the university, André de Loffre, a modern language professor and custodian of the library, appealed to the commanding officer to spare one of the finest libraries in the South. The officer, being sympathetic, sent a courier to Gen. Croxton at his headquarters in Tuscaloosa asking permission to save the rotunda, but the general refused to allow this. The officer reportedly said, "I will save one volume as a memento of this occasion." The volume selected was a rare copy of the Quran. Alexander Russell Webb is considered by historians to be the earliest prominent Anglo-American convert to Islam in 1888. In 1893, he was the sole representative of Islam at the first Parliament of the World's Religions. The Russian-born Muslim scholar and writer Ahmed Abdullah was another prominent early American Muslim. Slaves. Some of the slaves brought to colonial America from Africa were Muslims whose ancestors were converted to Islam by Arab invaders when they conquered most of North Africa. By 1800, some 500,000 Africans arrived in what became the United States. Historians estimate that between 15 and 30% of all enslaved African men and less than 15% of the enslaved African women were Muslims. These enslaved Muslims stood out from the compatriots because of their resistance, determination and education. It is estimated that over 50% of the slaves imported to North America came from areas where Islam was followed by at least a minority population. Thus, no less than 200,000 came from regions influenced by Islam. Substantial numbers originated from Senegambia, a region with an established community of Muslim inhabitants extending to the 11th century. Through a series of conflicts, primarily with the Fulani Jihad states, about half of the Senegambian Mandinka were converted to Islam, while as many as a third were sold into slavery to the Americas through capture in conflict. Michael A. Gomez speculated that Muslim slaves may have accounted for thousands, if not tens of thousands, but does not offer a precise estimate. He also suggests many non-Muslim slaves were acquainted with some tenets of Islam, due to Muslim trading and proselytizing activities. Historical records indicate many enslaved Muslims conversed in the Arabic language. Some even composed literature and commentaries on the Quran. Some newly arrived Muslim slaves assembled for communal salat. Some were provided a private praying area by their owner. The two best documented Muslim slaves were Ayuba Suleiman Diallo and Omar ibn Said. Suleiman was brought to America in 1731 and returned to Africa in 1734. Like many Muslim slaves, he often encountered impediments when attempting to perform religious rituals and was eventually allotted a private location for prayer by his master. Omar ibn Said is among the best documented examples of a practicing Muslim slave. He lived on a colonial North Carolina plantation and wrote many Arabic texts while enslaved. Born in the Kingdom of Futa Toro, he arrived in America in 1807, 1 month before the U.S. abolished importation of slaves. Some of his works include the Lord's Prayer, the Bismillah, This Is How You Pray, Quranic Phases, the 23rd Psalm, and an autobiography. In 1857, he produced his last known writing on Surah 110 of the Quran. In 1819, Omar received an Arabic translation of the Christian Bible from his master, James Owen. Omar converted to Christianity in 1820, an episode widely used throughout the South to prove the benevolence of slavery. However, some scholars believe he continued to be a practicing Muslim, based on dedications to Muhammad written in his Bible. Religious freedom. Views of Islam in America affected debates regarding freedom of religion during the drafting of the state constitution of Pennsylvania in 1776. Constitutionalists promoted religious toleration while anti-constitutionalists called for reliance on Protestant values in the formation of the state's Republican government. The former group won out, and inserted a clause for religious liberty in the new state constitution. American views of Islam were influenced by favorable Enlightenment writings from Europe. as well as Europeans who had long warned that Islam was a threat to Christianity and republicanism. In 1776, John Adams published Thoughts on Government, in which he mentions the Islamic prophet Muhammad as a sober inquirer after truth, alongside Confucius, Zoroaster, Socrates, and other thinkers. In 1785, George Washington stated a willingness to hire Mahometans, as well as people of any nation or religion, to work on his private estate at Mount Vernon if they were good workmen. In 1790, the South Carolina legislative body granted special legal status to a community of Moroccans. In 1797, President John Adams signed the Treaty of Tripoli, declaring the United States had no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Mussulmen. In his autobiography, published in 1791, Benjamin Franklin stated that he did not disapprove of a meeting place in Pennsylvania that was designed to accommodate preachers of all religions. Franklin wrote that, even if the Mufti of Constantinople were to send a missionary to preach Mohammedanism to us, he would find a pulpit at his service. Franklin also wrote an anti-slavery parody piece claiming to be translation of the response of a government official at Algiers to a 17th-century petition to banish slavery. That the piece develops the theme that Europeans are specially suited for enslavement on cultural and religious grounds, and that there would be practical problems with abolishing slavery in North Africa. This satirizes similar arguments that were then made about the enslavement of blacks in North America. Thomas Jefferson defended religious freedom in America, including those of Muslims. Jefferson explicitly mentioned Muslims when writing about the movement for religious freedom in Virginia. In his autobiography, Jefferson wrote, "The bill for establishing religious freedom was finally passed. A singular proposition proved that its protection of opinion was meant to be universal. Where the preamble declares that coercion is a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion, an amendment was proposed, by inserting the word Jesus Christ, so that it should read, a departure from the plan of Jesus Christ, the holy author of our religion. The insertion was rejected by a great majority, in proof that they meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and Mahometan, the Hindu and infidel of every denomination." While President Jefferson also participated in an iftar with the ambassador of Tunisia in 1809. Anti-Islam suppositions. However, not all politicians were pleased with the religious neutrality of the Constitution, which prohibited any religious test. Anti-federalists in the 1788 North Carolina ratifying convention opposed the new Constitution. One reason was the fear that someday Catholics or Muslims might be elected president. William Lancaster said, "Let us remember that we form a government for millions not yet in existence. In the course of 400 or 500 years, I do not know how it will work. This is most certain, that papists may occupy the chair, and Mahometans may take it. I see nothing against it." Indeed, in 1788 many opponents of the Constitution pointed to the Middle East, especially the Ottoman Empire, as a negative object lesson against standing armies and centralized state authority. Modern Muslims. Small-scale migration to the U.S. by Muslims began in 1840, with the arrival of Yemenis and Turks, and lasted until World War I. Most of the immigrants, from Arab areas of the Ottoman Empire, came with the purpose of making money and returning to the homeland. However, the economic hardships of 19th-century America prevented them from prospering, and as a result the immigrants settled in the United States permanently. These immigrants settled settled primarily in Dearborn, Michigan, Quincy, Massachusetts, and Ross, North Dakota. Ross, North Dakota is the site of the first documented mosque and Muslim cemetery, but it was abandoned and later torn down in the mid-1970s. A new mosque was built in its place in 2005. 1906, Bosniaks in Chicago, Illinois, started the Cemiyetul Hajriya. This is the longest-lasting incorporated Muslim community in the United States. They met in Bosnian coffee houses and eventually opened the first Islamic Sunday school with curriculum and textbooks under Bosnian scholar Sheikh Kamal Avdic. 1907, Lipka Tatar immigrants from the Podlasie region of Poland founded the first Muslim organization in New York City, the American Mohammedan Society. 1915, what is most likely the first American mosque was founded by Albanian Muslims in Biddeford, Maine. A Muslim cemetery still exists there. 1920, first Islamic mission station was established by Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, an Indian Ahmadi Muslim missionary, followed by the building of the Al-Sadiq Mosque in 1921. 1929, the Ross Masjid in North Dakota was founded by Syrian Muslims. There is still a cemetery nearby. 1934, the first building built specifically to be a mosque is established in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The mosque is where Abdullah Igram, a notable Muslim veteran, would teach the Quran. Abdullah Igram later wrote a letter to President Eisenhower persuading him to add the M option on military dog tags. 1945, a mosque existed in Dearborn, Michigan, home to the largest Arab American population in the U.S. Construction of mosques sped up in the 1920s and 1930s, and by 1952, there were over 20 mosques. Although the first mosque was established in the U.S. in 1915, relatively few mosques were founded before the 1960s. 87% of mosques in the U.S. were founded within the last 3 decades according to the Faith Communities Today survey. California has more mosques than any other state. Chinese Muslims, known as Hui, have immigrated to the United States and live within the Chinese community rather than integrating into other foreign Muslim communities. 2 of the most prominent Chinese American Muslims are the Republic of China National Revolutionary Army Generals Ma Honghui and his son Ma Dunjing, who moved to Los Angeles after fleeing from China to Taiwan. Pai Xianyong, son of the Chinese Muslim General Bai Chongxi, is a Chinese Muslim writer who moved to Santa Barbara, California after fleeing from China to Taiwan. And the Chinese Muslim artist Zhang Hongtu has become internationally known for his paintings and sculptures. In the year 1857, the Mughal Empire was dissolved after the Indian Rebellion of 1857, and many children and grandchildren of the last Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah II were killed during the conflict. And in the 20th century some descendants of his surviving children emigrated to the United States.